Since the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, the Kurdish people have been dispersed into 4 sovereign nations where they have had uneasy relationships with the central governments. Throughout the 20th century, the Kurds have been marginalized and persecuted, particularly in Iraq and Turkey. The nations they inhabit cannot allow an independent Kurdistan to exist, for its existence would threaten theirs. Yet the civil wars in Iraq and Syria, as well as the presence of ISIS, has put forth new challenges but also new opportunities for the Kurds. On September 25th, the Kurdistan Regional Government in Iraq will conduct a referendum on independence, and whatever the results may be, the vote is likely to enrage tensions in the Middle East. My name is Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. Check out patreon.com/Caspian Report for ways to support more original content like this. The quest for independence is elemental to Kurdish identity. However, the ethnic communities in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria speak different dialects and subscribe to different faiths and ideologies. For comparison, there are more linguistic and cultural similarities between Serbians, Croatians, and Bosnians than there are with the Kurdish people. With over 100 tribes, the divergent Kurdish groups focus their goals within specific countries. In addition, there are also Kurds who have established genuine political parties and their aspirations are limited to cultural and political recognition rather than independence. Other Kurdish movements took up arms and waged wars. Still others, like the Kurdistan Freedom Falcons in Turkey, have resorted to terrorist tactics by targeting civilians, including their Kurdish brethren. In Iraq, most Kurds believe that the central government in Baghdad has neglected their needs. They see the referendum as a legal effort to increase their autonomy, which they believe will resolve their issues. Iraqi Kurds are unified in their pursuit of independence, but they are divided along political lines. For instance, the Kurdistan Democratic Party, led by President Barzani, announced the referendum without the involvement of the Iraqi Kurdish parliament, which, following a dispute between Barzani and the political opposition, hasn't been active for years until recently. The Goran movement, which is the second largest faction in the Kurdish parliament, is concerned that Barzani seeks to use the referendum as a political tool to conceal his authoritarian rule and financial malpractice. The fact that Barzani has scheduled the parliamentary and presidential elections shortly after the referendum in early November 2017 supports the idea that the Kurdish president seeks to use the referendum to rally political support ahead of the elections. Therefore, the referendum should be viewed through the prism of independence as well as power grab by the ruling party. The setup of political affairs shows the excellence with which Barzani combines Kurdish nationalism with subtle Machiavellian politics. As the common enemy in ISIS dissipates, old wounds and divisions among the Kurds are bound to resurface. One example of this is Iraqi Kurdistan's rivalry with the Kurdish groups based in Turkey and Syria. For Washington, the People's Protection Units, or YPG, is the partner of choice in the fight against ISIS, and due to American support, Syrian Kurdish groups de facto rule northern parts of Syria. Yet, the Syrian-based YPG is connected with the Kurdistan Workers' Party, better known as the PKK, in Turkey, which Ankara and Washington consider a terrorist organization. What's more is that Iraqi Kurdish officials consider their Turkish and Syrian counterparts as rivals. The only reason Kurdish groups in Iraq have cooperated with Kurdish groups in Syria and Turkey is because of a common enemy in ISIS. Yet, as ISIS diminishes, old wounds among the Kurdish parties will bleed again at the slightest dispute. Although Barzani's referendum is limited to Iraqi Kurdistan, its symbolic impact will extend to Turkey and Iran as well, which hold sizable Kurdish communities. Officials in Ankara and Tehran fear that an independent Kurdistan in Iraq could galvanize their own Kurdish populations, which number at around 15 million and 7 million respectively. For Turkey, the stakes are notably high. Ever since the Turkish military leaders endorsed racist policies against the Kurds in the late 1970s, Kurdish PKK and the Turkish military forces have fought a long and costly war over the control of the water-rich southeastern provinces of Turkey. Today, many of the past Turkish policies have been demolished, but the Kurds maintain a difficult relationship with the government in Ankara. Hence, Turkey has no interest in granting its Kurdish populated areas further autonomy, and the situation is further complicated by the conflicts in neighboring Syria and Iraq. That said, Turkey and Iraqi Kurdistan have a complex love-hate relationship. Since Baghdad refuses to cooperate with Erbil, the latter has come to depend on Ankara to export its oil to global markets. This has cultivated in a fruitful relationship which in 2013 reached $8 billion in annual trade. It also displays Turkey's decisive influence over the well-being of Iraqi Kurdistan. On the other hand, the Turkish-based PKK has a presence in northern Iraq. The result is a complicated situation where the Syrian YPG and Turkish PKK compete with Turkey and Iraqi Kurdistan. But since YPG and PKK have a presence in Iraqi Kurdistan as well, it compels the Turks to strike targets in the territory of their diplomatic allies. At the same time, the mainstream Kurdish populations share a strong sense of solidarity with one another and don't care for the political divisions. This compels Barzani and his party to carefully manage nationalist sentiment with geopolitical reality. If Barzani fails to do so, the ruling party will lose ground to the political opposition. Obviously, in this complicated geopolitical environment, things don't always go as planned. And when mainstream expectations don't match with reality, it backfires. Turkey has the power to apply critical economic pressure on Iraqi Kurdistan. However, President Erdogan is likely to proceed with restraint as he prepares for the presidential elections in 2019. He wants to secure the votes of the Kurdish community in Turkey, but he also wants to sway the votes of Turkish nationalists. Thus, considering the situation, Erdogan's reaction to the referendum is bound to swing from outright opposition to informal support for Barzani. While Ankara maintains a business-like attitude towards the referendum, Tehran, on the other hand, has been vocally resistant to the idea. Like Turkey, Iran fears that an independent Kurdistan will inspire its own Kurdish insurgency. Plus, Tehran maintains close relations with the central government in Baghdad as well as the Shia militias in Iraq. In fact, much of Iraq's domestic and foreign policy is put into motion by Iran. In this context, policymakers in Tehran believe that the Kurdish referendum threatens Iranian geopolitical interests, and Iran's concerns are backed by disturbing trends. As ISIS has diminished, Kurdish militias across the region have surged, which has resulted in a series of minor attacks against Iranian military outposts in the northwest of the country. The assailants are now seeking for foreign support, but thus far only Israel and Saudi Arabia have vested an interest to render assistance to these groups to undermine Tehran. Iran, being a nation of numerous ethnic groups, is worried that the Kurdish separatist groups will seek to provoke other minorities such as Azerbaijanis, Balochis, and Arabs into an ethnic insurgency as well. How far Israeli and Saudi support to the Kurdish militant groups will go is yet to be seen, but from Iranian point of view, it is a matter of utmost priority. Furthermore, Iranian-based Kurdish groups such as the Kurdistan Free Life Party, the Kurdistan Freedom Party, and the Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan mostly operate across the border in Iraqi Kurdistan and have links with the Turkish-based PKK. Meaning, like the Turkish strategy to deal with the Kurdish separatist militias, Iran has to strike targets in northern Iraq. One way the Iranians have responded to the Kurdish referendum is by using ISIS fighters and Shia militias. In early September, Hezbollah, which is an Iranian proxy, came to an understanding with ISIS, in which the latter mobilized its jihadist fighters from the Lebanese border to the Iraqi front line. In the meantime, Iran mobilized its Shia Iraqi militias towards the Kurdish groups. By altering the trajectory of ISIS and Shia militias, Tehran seeks to apply indirect military pressure on Iraqi Kurdistan. In time, as ISIS dissipates, Iranian militias and the Kurdish forces could find themselves on opposite ends. In this regard, the disputed territories in Iraq are set to become the next battle space between Iran, Turkey, and the Kurds. What's important to understand is that Iraqi Kurds primarily reside in 3 provinces that make up the Kurdistan Regional Government. Yet many Kurds also live beyond these borders in what is known as the disputed zones, but they do not necessarily make up the majority there. Nevertheless, Erbil has made claims to the adjacent regions that are beyond its jurisdiction, such as Kirkuk, Sinjar, and Diyala. These disputed areas also happen to host offshoots of the Turkish-based PKK. Now, the presence of PKK in northern Iraq evidently draws in the Turks and the Iranians. Kurdish rule in the disputed areas has brought forth a fragile peace. Security is somewhat assured, but officials in Erbil also pursue a policy that has displaced non-Kurdish minorities. In this framework, the Kurds seek to undo Saddam's Arabization policy, which in the 1970s displaced thousands of Kurds from the area and settled instead ethnic Arabs. The Kurdish attempt to rewrite the demographics back in their favor has been a vocal point in the relations between Erbil and Baghdad. Officials in Iraqi Kurdistan plan to include the disputed zone in the referendum as well, which will reinforce Kurdish claims on the area. However, because of the reverse oppressive policy, minorities such as Arabs, Turkmen, and Assyrians are skeptical of an independent Kurdistan. Adding to the tensions are the displaced people by the conflict with ISIS. Iraqi Kurdistan shelters around 250,000 Syrian refugees and another 1.5 million internally displaced people from the rest of Iraq. How they will respond to the referendum or an independent Kurdistan remains unclear. Meanwhile, across the globe, the United States has also expressed concern over the referendum. Although Washington has been a long ally of the Kurdistan Regional Government, the Americans believe that the timing of the referendum is misplaced. Moreover, the United States has spent hundreds of billions of dollars and thousands of lives in an effort to keep Iraq unified. An independent Kurdistan would render all those sacrifices futile. Officials in Washington are likely to seek for ways to exploit the Kurdish groups to American advantage. Washington's primary concern is that a potential breakaway Kurdish state would inflame tensions and distract the regional players from the fight against ISIS. Ultimately, the outcome of the referendum is not in doubt, since independence is a vital part of the Kurdish identity. However, Barzani is not obligated to unilaterally declare an independent Kurdistan. In the immediate outcome of the vote, Barzani's legitimacy will strengthen ahead of the presidential and parliamentary elections. He will also be able to negotiate with his counterparts in Baghdad from a position of strength. However, the referendum will also complicate, rather than resolve, the issues facing the Kurds across the region. Most likely, Ankara, Tehran, and Washington will exploit Kurdish groups for their own political gains. It is these powers, not the Kurdish factions or the referendum, that will shape the future of the Kurdish people. A well-known expression that resonates in the region is that the Kurds have no friends but the mountains, which is a vivid reflection of the regional geopolitics. This was a Caspian report by me, Shirvan. Be sure to activate your notifications by clicking on the bell icon next to the subscribe button. This will ensure that you do not miss out on the next report. Also, special thanks to our contributors on Patreon who give us the means to produce these reports. If you want to be part of that process, visit patreon.com/CaspianReport. In any case, thank you for your time and sağ ol.